Hello, YouTube. Situation is going a bit better because I'm getting some insulation for my bathroom and bedroom heat insulation, so it gains specific devices to monitor me through heat effect and Antifa. But on another note, I wanted to make a normal video where I kind of pontificate about pop culture as I do with Spider-Man. And, well, what do I have to say? Well, I'm thinking of the prequels to they're making right now. The series on various subscription services and the Lord of the Rings and the Game of Thrones series. And the kind of tokenization and how people take it very hard. Oof, sorry, I saw my shadow on there. Like, what is that? Oh. How they take it very hard, even though none of these stories are canon anyway, as far as I know. As far as I know. And so I'm wondering, like, and like my generation grew up with like Power Rangers, which is like blatant. Power Rangers and Captain Planet. Blatant tokenization, like Captain Planet. There's like 5 characters. There's like a white American kid, a white Russian girl, Native American kid, a black kid, and there was someone else who's blatant tokenization. I don't really remember. And Power Rangers was blatant tokenization, where it was like this white guy as like the alpha male character, and like the main male lead, Pink Ranger as the when he was a Red Ranger, the male lead, and the Pink Ranger is like the female lead, and even though they had different episodes about everyone, like exactly, and there was a Blue Ranger who's kind of the dork. And kind of you're perceived like almost being a male, but he goes, he becomes, his character development in Power Rangers lands, sort of, right? Episodic, what am I saying? And then, what? We just went through the semi-normal ones, because then there's a Black Ranger, there's a black guy who dances. There's a Yellow Ranger, there's a yellow, Asian woman. He's Asian. There's a White Ranger, there's another white guy, and he's stronger than the other white guy. Extra white. And he starts out as a Green Ranger, and he's a villain, and then he changes teams and becomes a White Ranger. And all this, what I'm saying is this blatant tokenization. We didn't complain, because there was no source material, and also I realized that when I was growing up, don't get me wrong, this is going to sound weird anyway. So, the special effects of the first Power Rangers aren't very good, especially by today's standards. But by today's standards, they were fairly good. Then there's, compare that to today's, what Amazon is making and certain things. And they're trying to make things on the same level as, like, visually as the Lord of the Rings movies that I grew up with, like the J.R.R. Tolkien ones. And those were, like I'm saying, the Peter Jackson ones, sorry. And those were really, like, and they were based on books. They were really true to the books, is what I'm saying. So, like, they weren't completely, I remember, and essentially man, like, believed that they made Shadowfax white. Because the black horse is just a really symbolic thing, and there's a whole bunch of things. But they made it really true to the story, and they made it feel like you were in the universe, right? And mostly. And what am I saying? And we liked it. We liked feeling like it was. We liked feeling like, because it's high definition thing, and the more high definition things are, the more realistic we want our media to be, I think. And I think we kind of lose touch with that. That before we had such, amazing special effects, we didn't expect as much from media, and we sort of allowed things to be what they creatively were, especially if they weren't based on anything. And since they didn't have amazing special effects, we were more accustomed to the fact that a movie could not reproduce what a book, wow, what a book could. For instance, I'm in the yard of my building. Anyway, so a movie can't reproduce what a book can because of all the book's subtext of the story, of all the objective, sort of events in the story have all the subtext from the book. But the more kind of visually kind of high definition our media becomes, especially when it's like incredibly high definition, like I'm saying. So these are subscription services making miniseries, and they are higher quality than your average B movie, right? There's like about as high quality visually as like the Lord of the Rings movies I grew up with, as far as I can tell, right? And people are peeved. They're peeved that like there's tokenization in characters that wouldn't be that, let's say, complexion or ethnicity or race or whatever. And those universes already have certain characters that are of that race, but they specifically kind of insert them into situations that they aren't in the canon. And, well, what am I commenting on? Well, there's an attitude in the pop culture nowadays where it's all, well, representation in this mainstream stuff, because, well, we're making it up as we go along anyway. Like, none of these stories are canon in the book universe or anything, as far as I know. And so they don't care. But to the rest of people, since this is like the highest quality, let's say, any series in terms of definition, highest quality, let's say, miniseries or movies or what have you, that they're getting from their pop culture, from their culture in general, they're going to expect the highest quality. They're going to expect as close to what they want, what they think of as their source material as humanly possible. And we're not back in the days of, let's say, the highest quality sort of things being kind of hit or miss. We don't feel like we are, because this high quality, this high definition video kind of braces you for realism, and then sometimes things take you out of the realm of disbelief, well, they bring you back into the realm of disbelief, let's say. So what am I talking about? Well, I watch YouTube channels about lore, and as far as I know, people are basically mad that in the Lord of the Rings prequel they made, I think, some elves black, and there are black people in Tolkien's universe, in a continent that's basically Africa, and they could have done something with the actual lore, but they didn't. They simply sort of inserted them into a race that was like defined in a certain way, as far as we know. And then in the Game of Thrones prequel, once again, there's a character that's defined as like being a little darker than the rest of the characters in, like, say, his family. And then, but later, his, like, in the story, his daughter or granddaughter or something sees a black person for the first time and thinks it's a demon. And in this version, she's black, and like her family's black, and it's like, well, yeah, but very dark black, like unmistakably black. And it's like, well, this is the book version, this is that version, and there's black people in the story. And this character is kind of depicted as being racist, in like a very medieval way. like Game of Thrones, and they, in a way, they whitewash the character by tokenizing. It's weird. So people are complaining about this, and it's like, but wait, these are stories about their childhoods. These are stories about, you know, characters that didn't even enter the main series, because by then, you know, they weren't copying the books at all by the last 3 seasons of the Game of Thrones, and like things that didn't happen because they don't own, like, the people who make the Lord of the Rings content connected with the movies don't own like the Silmarillion or anything like that. They just own the main 3 books, and I think they own The Hobbit now for movies, but they don't necessarily own like everything to do with that. So they can't do everything, and they have to make their own stuff. My criticism of them is they keep acting like making, say, a creative new version of the story that includes these characters that are previously in the story, maybe in the background. Exactly, you can make a story about them of any sort. They kind of insist on implying that this has to contradict the original lore. And you know, it's just to create contention, it feels like, because if these are expert writers, they would know how to take care of lore, but then they also, they make a lot of mistakes with canonicity and timeline, with a lot of things. What am I saying? So these people, I guess they sort of like go like, well, we're not making classics anymore, we're not remaking anything. You know, maybe these people are writers. They're definitely directors. They're definitely like artists that appreciate art and storytelling. And they probably have like a taste for classics in their minds, or old, let's say, movies or TV. And in their minds, like, oh, well, nothing's gonna be like this. Like, for instance, the Lord of the Rings movies, the original ones, are nothing compared to the. I might have skimmed through the Hobbit movies. I don't even know. I can't. Ugh. Sorry. Compared to the original Lord of the Rings movies. Like, pirated, obviously. What now? So to these people, it's like they don't care as much about their art. And to the people watching it, it's like, well, especially the way the art is sold to them, it's not sold to you like, oh, this is just something that, oh, we'll just do whatever with because we already made good stuff, so now we're making this and it's easy because we have the money and we have all this great technology. To them, like, no, we want to watch Lord of the Rings, or we want to watch Game of Thrones. Like, for instance, the way they ended Game of Thrones, from what I heard, the reason they chose the ending of Game of Thrones is because it's one thing that nobody on the internet theorized would happen. Like, all of that, it didn't meet anyone's expectations at all. But to them, it's like, well, that's the most clever one. Like, they had a whole bunch of endings planned, and they filmed a whole bunch of things. And in the end, they were like, well, we don't want anyone to be right. And, like, to me, that takes away the degree it was an artwork and makes it kind of a job and like a posture, like a posturing action. Like, there were people looking at themes in the writing from season 1, you know, based on books and, you know, based on the books and the directing of the show, and expecting themes to be followed through with, and they specifically weren't. And I suppose the moral of the story was like being, you know, consumed with political power is a downfall. You know, I understand that. At the same time, it's like very disappointing anyway. So I didn't even give Game of Thrones much of a look after they stopped following the books at all. What am I saying? So when I was growing up, we didn't have the best of the best cameras or special effects, and tokenism was rampant, and diversity was less so. We didn't even care that tokenism was rampant. We loved our bullshit. And now we have really high definition cameras and really good special effects. We can afford to make, at the very least, the most physically realistic and sometimes fantastically well directed visual cinema, visual art, in history. And I'm talking about as a civilization, like as like a human race. So, and we've got this pop culture that's more or less like propped up at this point. And they're surviving through subscriptions. And at the same time, like, they're like, well, what's never been done before? Well, we tell people in our schools that nobody's ever, been able to, the kids never had role models of their own group or something. And I'm like, well, I was a 90s kid. Like, that's not true. In fact, when I was growing up, if it was a token, you expected them to be a good role model, like automatically. Like, and it was strange if they had a negative character trait at all that you could call a negative character trait, and wasn't just something that life had thrown at them and they had to deal with and made them struggle with making good or responsible or just confident decisions. And now we kind of live in an age where it's like, well, kind of my end of the culture is like, well, why are you doing this to our beloved stories? And I'm like, well, that's not really even your beloved story, and you can read or listen to your beloved story very often. But I do understand where they're coming from, because the higher definition our art becomes, the more we want our stuff defined. And when someone's like, oh, well, we're going to kind of stuff an advertisement for the media in media so that the media becomes more than what it was. Like, for instance, to me, the Lord of the Rings prequel isn't going to be Lord of the Rings the way the Lord of the Rings books are. Okay? It's just never going to be. It's like the Star Wars sequels are not Star Wars movies the way Star Wars prequels and originals are. And the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit movies, and all this is never going to be Lord of the Rings, and that's never going to, even the Game of Thrones, the whole series is never going to be Game of Thrones for me, because I know so many differences just from like watching the YouTube stuff. It's like, no, I'll just read the books if I ever feel like it. If I ever want dark Machiavellian fantasy, that isn't, let's say, Dragon Age Origins or something, like some nonsense. What am I saying? And basically what I'm saying is, I, for instance, and maybe this might sound, anyway, this is what it is. I like my B movies. I like my cult classics. I like liking what I like, and it not needing to be the most successful thing in the world at the time. At the time, especially at this time, with all this propped up nonsense. Like, I remember the movie Avatar, like the CGI super flick. They were saying it was the best movie of all time before it came out and before there was any reviews of it. And I went in there and I was disappointed, sadly. And I had I'm pretty sure I had like full IMAX nonsense experience. And I was just like, because I'm a sci-fi fan and I wanted more than just a visual experience, I guess. But that's what that was. It was all right. Like, the more you expect out of it, the less you get. That's not the point. The point is, I feel like the answer to this is that if you're going to be working with a classic, they should try to meet people midway, where at least it feels like the original stuff, and the people who are into the classic will, not feel like, well, these people are insulting the classic by implying that they have to insert this, tokenization. And at the same time, that the pop culture is sort of masquerading as like the B movie cult classic culture, where it's like, oh, we're actually representing these small groups of people that don't usually get a show. And really, like, first off, supply and demand makes it so whatever you're a minority in for whatever reason, in terms of your social attention, you actually get more for whatever reason. Well, supply and demand, super offensive, right? Then there's we're already offended everywhere. I had another point. Trying to get this done, posted before midnight. Happy Labor Day, I suppose, even though commies are attacking me. Hope you enjoyed your night, or whatever, or you enjoyed your last night. So I was saying that they're masquerading as the B movie kind of cult classic culture, cult series culture, let's say, where they're like, oh yeah, I was saying that first off, especially in like acting, since, like I'm saying, we want certain people to be, played by, let's say, characters that seem to feel like they actually are the characters from our source material. There's also the fact that, to be honest with you, who's always going to be most represented in Hollywood and media and Broadway and movies and TV and series? Actors, writers, artists. This minority group that, often, and I've lived it, resents not being able to make as much money as they would like off their art, which they often work very hard on. And often, you could even imagine what let's say a failed art major from college or some dropout or whatever might do if he just becomes the leader of a union in Germany, let's say. And so, so what am I saying? So if these people are going to literally be propped up and represent the cream of the crop in many ways, in terms of like, this is the newest thing we have these high definition, special effects and, recording devices that we often use to make these amazing media portrayals of these amazing stories, often that we take many liberties with, often maybe because we have to and maybe because we want to. Then try to make something that's going to make everyone happy who's actually trying to watch, for instance, that source material. At least try, like I'm saying. So a movie and a TV show can't always be exactly like the source material, especially if it's a book. Often it just can't be. And maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it's a little too cheesy or unrelatable, or it just takes away from the visual directive. Like, I'm happy Sam Raimi's Spider-Man didn't have to make his own web, even though it takes away from certain aspects of Spider-Man. He gets his web out of his wrist automatically. What am I saying? Meanwhile, without this kind of masquerade that they're this like small, that they're the grassroots, that they're the indie culture, essentially. The indie media sort of is kind of, it's almost like they might get the feeling that they're Uncle Tomming almost just by representing themselves wholeheartedly and sincerely, let alone any niche that they might be interested in or just be good at portraying or representing. They might, because that's the thing. So at this point, if you have a propped up pop culture, a propped up, let's say, dominant media culture, you are already going to get people who don't necessarily have to conform to the free market and make the best of the best. Now, what's going to happen is, in the long run, people are going to value the quality of their directing stories more than the definition and the amount of money put into the production, which in many ways has already happened in certain things. Meanwhile, what I'm saying is, a cult classic, like for instance, I really like Starship Troopers, the movie. I like the book, but I also like the movie. The movie is in many ways not much like the book. And it's a B movie. The special effects were never considered very good. It was made like many years after Alien and Aliens. It has many of the same qualities and is, compared to it, visually absolute garbage, directed purposefully kind of like absolute garbage, and also perfect and amazing and high quality satire of propaganda and what would happen in the future, while like basically it attempts to be a satire of World War II satire. It's not satire of World War II propaganda, and it succeeds and fails, and that's part of why it's perfect, because you enjoy it while also going like, ha ha ha, this is hilarious. That's not the point. So this is a cult classic. People don't apologize for enjoying this. People don't get into fights very often about like little things that change it from the canon, big things, giant things. The rain today beneath my building. So, you heard what I said. So when I was growing up, this tokenization thing, it didn't actually get in the way of many things, and you kind of expected it, because if you were making, like, because we expected regular tropes, we expected the everyman, and they wanted to insert modern themes, modern social themes into our media, and they were often actually very good at trying, at the very least, to push people in the right direction. Whereas now it's more just sort of, like I'm saying, like no one's ever done this before. Literally, we had to contradict the original stuff to even get you represented, and that's actually not true. And meanwhile, we're kind of screwing up the market, where it's like, well, everyone with something kind of on point and objective to say is doing it from this indie position, and the people that make the things that this generation is going to want to call classics. For instance, I was going out with a girl who didn't grow up with the original Lord of the Rings movies. She grew up with the Hobbit movies. And it was like, wow, and she really liked them. And it's like, don't get me wrong, like, I understand, you know, like, everybody's got their taste, and there are people who really enjoy the Hobbit movies, and I'm just like, they're nothing compared to the original. I'm reaching half an hour. So what am I basically saying? I'm saying we're only taking this so seriously because we expect so much out of these companies because of the technology they use, but they don't expect so much out of themselves. They prefer, most likely, older media, and many of these are vanity projects, specifically about criticizing kind of established culture, much like Star Wars Episode 8, how they specifically burn all the Jedi books. And, you know, it's very symbolic and very specific. And so they don't care very much. They burn their own books and go, ha ha ha, but it's really just a show because they don't care very much, and they must care about some books because they're all about books, writers, directors, all this. And they're really, I guess they're realizing the independent market is taking command of the whole market, and they're trying to like do a bait and switch, kind of like Indiana Jones in the middle of the temple switching the purse for a rock or something. And meanwhile, when I was growing up, we knew this was normal. We knew, you know, every show is made for somebody. We weren't kind of like, we didn't feel automatically offended by our own tastes, and if we did, that was being self-conscious. And yeah, I don't put that much pressure on these prequels because they're already not canon to the book series. Thank you again for all of your time. Have a good night.